The Denver Broncos were back on the practice field on Tuesday ahead of Monday Night Football next week there. They'll have some time off, but overall, what's the vibe right now in Denver? Plus, we take a look at the state of the AFC on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked On Broncos every single day all year long for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed here. The Broncos back on the practice field on Tuesday at the Centura Training Center in Dove Valley as they prepare for that Buffalo Bills matchup coming up in just about 6 days' time against the Buffalo Bills. Monday Night Football, primetime action. The stakes are very high for the second half stretch of the season for this Broncos football team. And look, we're going to take a little bit of a glance on today's episode of the show at the AFC West. We're going to take a look at the entire AFC because it feels like this year the AFC is very, very tight right now. Now, while obviously there are teams at the top, there's not a lot of games, not a lot of distance separating them from maybe the 12th or the 14th ranked team inside of the AFC. But as always, let's break it all down. Some quick news and notes here. Obviously, the Broncos were back on the practice field, a light practice overall on Tuesday. They're going to be back on the practice field once again on Thursday. They're going to have Wednesday off. They'll go Thursday, Friday, Saturday practice, and then they'll be on a plane to Buffalo on Sunday, and then they'll obviously play on Monday night there. But a lot of things that are going to go on this week here in Dove Valley. We'll keep you covered every step of the way here on Locked On Broncos. But really, despite the fact that the Broncos are back on the practice field, really the biggest news of the day for Denver was that they announced that they're building a brand new team facility and team headquarters in Dove Valley. Now, I know what many Broncos fans are thinking. If you haven't heard the news and this is your first time hearing it, you're thinking, where are they going to build it? They're going to build and add on to the Centura Health Training Center as it already is right now in Dove Valley. Now, this has been something that's kind of been in the works for a little bit. We've had our inklings of it because there have been surveyors that have been out there while we've been out there attending practice. They've been marking certain things. They've been looking at certain things. And so all of us were kind of connecting the dots saying, okay, hey, what's going on here? We know that since Greg Penner and obviously the Walton Penner family ownership group have taken over control of the team, they are always being forward thinking. And I think a lot of what they want to do and a lot of the basis behind why they decided to make some of these changes and to build and add on to a new training facility and team headquarters is all about the overall experience for players, staff, employees, and even fans there in Dove Valley. And one thing that Greg Penner did say, he says, our vision is to create a new home for the Denver Broncos that reflects our values of winning and teamwork with modern Colorado design. It says here that while we considered several options to modify our current facility, we decided to do this the right way by building a new player-centered headquarters with an efficient layout and the latest amenities. Having both of our football and business operations on the same campus will foster a championship environment in pursuit of our goals on and off the field. What he means by that in terms of football and business operations, a lot of the business operations aspect of the Broncos organization, their offices, their day-to-day are at Empower Field at Mile High. So now it's bringing a whole bunch of staff over from there into the new team facility, and it is a massive, massive upgrade. We're talking about 3 stories. We're talking about an overall 30% increase in size altogether here. In terms of that, right now it's around 115,000 square feet. The new team headquarters, it's expected to span more than 320,000 square feet on a 26-acre campus, and it's going to include 3 new football fields. If you've seen the pictures of what the mock is going to look like, it honestly looks really, really exciting. And the building and the construction of this for the Broncos is set to begin officially in the spring, and this is going to span over 3 years with the expectation that the new team headquarters, the new team facility is going to be up and running by 2026. So about 2.5, 3 years of operational work here for the Broncos. And obviously the architectural design of it, it looks pretty incredible. Very interested to see maybe what else goes into it. Now, for example, the NFLPA, we did the report card last season about what players say about the team environment in which they work in, whether it's cafeteria stuff, whether it's the locker room. And one of the biggest concerns that players expressed was the size of the locker room. And look, I can agree. Like it is, there's not a lot of space. A lot of it is kind of, maybe a little bit outside of my own shoulder width there, where you have your space, someone has their space. And when there's a media scrum of somebody's locker, it prohibits a player from trying to get to their locker if it's right next to the player being interviewed. So a lot of logistics stuff there. So they are going through and they're expanding the locker room overall, making it much bigger. They're set to increase that area by nearly 21,000 square feet, where it's going to expand locker rooms, meeting spaces, and their sports performance areas, according to the press release that they had put out on Tuesday. Denver's football operations will be located on the second floor of the third-story design, and the business operations will be located on the third floor, with obviously player stuff being on the first floor there. But very excited about that. And I know some fans are wondering, what does that mean about us? Is training camp still going to be open to the fans? The Broncos say yes, that is the plan, that fans will still be able to attend training camp while the construction of the new team facility is ongoing. They said something along the lines that they will be adding bleachers in a sense as they build up to it. But to my understanding, I think Mike Kliss put it out there that they're going to move the berm in which all of you are used to sitting on. They're going to move that to the other side of the facility versus where it currently was. So I'm very excited to see what that looks like, how that transition process is out. I'm not sure if there will be any limitations at training camp, but there's going to be a really, really cool design when this is all said and done. I think will enhance the fan experience, but more importantly, I think it's going to set a different tone, right? Change of scenery, change of the environment, being able to knock down the old walls to build the new foundation. I mean, there's a message in there or something along the lines of that. But I think this is an exciting development here for the Denver Broncos. And the cool thing about it, look, this is all privately funded. The Walton Penner Family Ownership Group is putting up $175 million of their own money to make this happen. They're showcasing a commitment to the Broncos, obviously their investment in purchasing the team, but more importantly, what stands out to me is they're forward thinking. They care about their staff. They care about the players. They care about everything that goes on within the operations side of that building and making sure that it is a state-of-the-art facility that will be unveiled in 2026. So yeah, just 2.5, 3 years from now. I'm very excited to see where will this Broncos team be by then. Interesting things to kind of ponder here as we continue on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. But Broncos Country, we want to hear from you on today's episode of the show. How do you feel about the announcement of a new team facility, team headquarters? What are you excited about in terms of what you've seen from the project mock-up? And also, are there any concerns you may have about that? Let us know if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening wherever you get your podcast. But one thing that is coming up here in just a moment, Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about the state of the AFC West, looking at the Chargers, the Raiders, the Chiefs, and the Broncos. And while the division hasn't been what many have expected, it's still relatively competitive. We'll dive deeper into that on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Gametime app. And if you've ever had an off-putting ticket buying experience, Gametime is the solution that can help alleviate any of the concerns you've had in past experience when you're trying to buy tickets to your favorite sporting events or any other events that are going on near you. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events that are going on near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime, they take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And if you're a member of Broncos Country, going to the Buffalo Bills Monday Night Football game against the Broncos in primetime action, you can see what your view and your vantage point will be like directly inside of the Gametime app. They have all-in prices that show you your total up front so that you know that you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
We are taking a look at the state of the AFC West through the first half of the 2023 NFL season. The Chiefs remain on top, but could there be some shuffling? Are the Broncos going to finally get out of the bottom of the AFC West the rest of the way this season? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all of the other teams in the West. But before we do, I want to give a huge shout out and say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Cody and I appreciate you so much for engaging with the show, however you choose to do so, especially for those of you that subscribe, free and available everywhere that you can get podcasts, as well as those that watch and subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate all of you that help us get pushed up in the algorithm by liking, commenting, all those different sorts of things on YouTube. But however you choose to make us part of your day, man, we're so grateful that you choose to do that. And for all the support that you give, it means a ton to us. So, Cody, state of the AFC West here, the Kansas City Chiefs, they the ball was back to bouncing their direction as of Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. As we kind of look at their outlook the rest of the season, I just feel like even with their flaws, it's kind of like last year, isn't it? When they lost Tyreek Hill in the offseason, trading him to Miami, their offense was still number one in the league. They were still able to overcome so much because of the fact that, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. Now the defense, though, kind of seems to be a bigger part of that team's identity.
Look, the Chiefs defense is the best defense that they've had probably in well over 15 to 20 years. I mean, just watching what they're able to do, their pressure disguises, the way that they do certain things. Steve Spagnuolo's got, I think, the right personnel finally, right? Because we've always known Steve Spagnuolo, obviously ultra aggressive, but he's always had these bend but don't break defenses. It seems like Kansas City's defense has been more aggressive than I remember seeing them in recent memory. So, I think for Denver to get the win that they did, 24-9 in their last game that they had, I think was huge. And look, the Chiefs responded against the Dolphins, and still, even with the Chiefs' struggles that we have seen, they're not necessarily, I think, as strong offensively as they were in years past, but the defense is helping them out. Special teams, obviously, has always been a good aspect of what they're able to do. And then they still find ways to win games. They're sitting, on top right now of the AFC, tied with Baltimore at a 7-2 record. The thing with Kansas City, I think, that stands out to me is that Travis Kelce is the big part of what he and Patrick Mahomes have going on. They're really struggling right now, I think, to find a legitimate receiver to kind of take the pressure off that. And so if teams are focusing on Travis Kelce, they're almost daring Mahomes in Kansas City. Hey, we dare you to beat us with Rashee Rice. We dare you to beat us with Watson and these other guys. But Kansas City is still the most dangerous team right now in the NFL, I think, regardless of their circumstance or situation. But it's crazy to see right now, right? Obviously, at 7-2, Denver's at a 3-5 record. Denver's still within 3 games of Kansas City. So even though KC's at the top and doesn't seem like they're necessarily going to go on a slide, I still think that, hey, it's nice that the Broncos are within striking distance here when we talk about how the AFC West is. And obviously right now, Kansas City's still probably the favorite to win the division. But I also think we maybe need to take a look at the Los Angeles Chargers here a little bit. A team that, Sayre, they feel so up and down on a week-to-week basis, right? Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, Justin Herbert this year has been dealing with an injury to his, finger on his non-throwing hand. He had a broken finger there. That defense for them is playing pretty well with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. I mean, we just watched a Monday Night Football. I think it was kind of bittersweet, or enjoyable in the sense from Broncos fans. Unfortunate because they're like, hey, it's the Chargers, but they were manhandling guys like Billy Turner on the New York Jets and Nathaniel Hackett. Like they could not do anything. The Jets offense couldn't against this Chargers defense. So the Chargers, they're at 4-4. I mean, Denver's within, game and a half of them. And so to be honest with you, Sayre, I really feel like, okay, hey, Denver still has a pretty good chance to maybe finish in the top 2 inside the AFC West this upcoming season. But, your thoughts on the Chargers, and then we can obviously get into the Raiders, who for some reason are seemingly in a position that they've been familiar with for quite some time over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, I guess first with the Chargers, you're right. It feels like defensively in the AFC West this year is kind of where teams are either making or breaking their seasons so far. I mean, Kansas City's been saved by their defense. The Chargers, ultimately against the New York Jets, even, we kind of saw a little bit of a microcosm of this season for them. Obviously, the injury to Mike Williams is huge. Austin Eckler missed a bunch of time, so they've needed the defense to carry, but it's pretty fascinating to see, like, Justin Herbert, is he that dude who's going to carry this team to certain places? I don't really get that vibe. Maybe any of you listening, you give me your thoughts down in the comments. It doesn't feel like Herbert is the type of quarterback like what Tom Brady and Peyton Manning used to be. I'm not trying to put him on that pedestal, but this doesn't feel like, with as talented as he is, he doesn't seem like the kind of quarterback that's taking that team to new heights. Or maybe is it coaching? What is the ultimate factor there? But I do like the Chargers defense right now, unfortunately, for the Denver Broncos, who play them twice. They're playing well. and they've got some dudes on that side of the ball. We always knew if the Chargers could stay healthy, and their defense on paper has always looked really good. So year over year, not just like, they have all the same guys, but year over year, they seem to put together a talented crew. And the Raiders, they're kind of the opposite, right? It's like a total hodgepodge, like a group of misfits that somehow has won 4 games in this season. I mean, the dysfunction with the Raiders, Cody, is staggering to see that they've been able to win 4 out of their first 9 games, including, I guess, against the New York Giants, where they were celebrating with stogies in the locker room. I mean, I think that was more so they're dunking on Josh McDaniels than they are celebrating beating the Giants. But even so, I mean, that's not the best look, I guess, for the Raiders. It's just it is what it is. But that's kind of, you got to celebrate the little things, I guess. And if they're celebrating a better locker room culture, what does that mean for this team going forward? Aiden O'Connell, is he the answer? Like, it's one of the strangest stories of the season is this Raiders team.
When you look at how everybody else in the AFC West is doing, right, there was so much focus and attention on how bad the Broncos start was, right? It almost seems like now things are kind of balancing out a little bit. Like, I don't think anybody in AFC West is necessarily a laughing stock, so to speak, but I think that the conversation surrounding the division that we all at one point were guilty of saying this could be the best division in football just 2 years ago. Every time we've said that, it's never worked out. So I don't think we're ever going to ever mention that ever again. But it just seems like the AFC West right now, like, while Kansas City is obviously at the top, like, there's still movement happening. Like, this division can still be relatively competitive. And I think the Broncos have proved that. And look over the history, like, Denver's still got to get over the hump of trying to beat the Raiders, right? They beat the streak about the Kansas City Chiefs. They avoided 17 straight losses to them. They got to win. They've always seemed to split the season series with the Los Angeles Chargers. They have yet to kind of get over the hump of beating the Raiders. But for the Raiders as well, I mean, how many times have we seen? And unfortunately, thankfully, this past week, it wasn't the Broncos. But when they fired John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia led them into Denver to beat the Broncos. And for some reason, every time they get an interim coach, they go on a little bit of a run. We'll see if that's the case here for them going forward. But, that locker room seems a little bit more bought in. I think we all know a little something about what it's like to move on after Josh McDaniels has destroyed your franchise. Just getting him out of the building is sage. I think maybe the post-game cigars for them were saging what was going on behind the scenes inside that locker room. But look, I think the AFC West can be very competitive down the second half stretch of the schedule here. I still think that the Broncos can make some noise inside the division. I think they have a chance still to maybe finish second in the AFC West, depending on what they do in the second half push. And it's a week-to-week thing, but we're going to see a lot of craziness. We know the Raiders are going to play the Jets now on Sunday Night Football going into next week. So there's going to be a lot of interesting storylines to come about the AFC West. We'll keep track on the AFC West going forward here as the second half of the season progresses. But Broncos Country, one thing we are going to do, where do the Denver Broncos sit in a tightly contested AFC conference? Despite their record, they still have a chance to be in the conversation. We'll dive deeper down today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at DoorDash. And look, Broncos Country, anytime that you have football going on Sunday, Monday, Thursday, or even Saturdays, if you love the college football experience, DoorDash will help you bring directly what you're feeling, what you're craving for directly to your doorstep. And if you're in the Denver area, my go-to on DoorDash is our good friends over there, Legal Pete's. I always get the protein-packed burrito, double packed with chicken, with steak, with rice. And I always like to add a little bit of queso in there, and DoorDash brings it directly to my doorstep. You can order chips, dips, nachos, and everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash, and you get it all delivered without missing the game. And I think the most important part is, did the game go to timeout? Well, that's a time where you can order in with DoorDash. If it's halftime, that's ordering time. And if the game reaches the 2-minute warning, you got it. That is your cue to order in today with DoorDash. You get all of your favorite restaurants and stores from retail to grocery all on an app, so you can shop for everything that you need to get game day ready and get prepared before game day. Stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all of your tailgate gear on DoorDash. Then get ready to watch your team win. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Once again, get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and you enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, real quick, want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We appreciate you so much for all the everydayers rocking with us, making us your first listen of the day every single day here. Sayre, let's talk about the AFC as a conference. Now, here as we prepare to enter week number 10 of the National Football League, we know that there's 8 weeks remaining here in the season. And as we've seen this year, the NFL is wildly unpredictable. Anything can happen. But when I look at the top 10 and I look at the AFC in general, Sayre, it's tightly contested. This is a very, very interesting season. And there's certain divisions that we'll obviously talk about as well. But, looking at the top 10 teams inside the AFC right now, obviously the Chiefs and the Ravens have the same record at 7-2. Lamar Jackson, those guys are playing really good football in Baltimore offensively, defensively. They're coming off a game where they just smacked the Seattle Seahawks and made Geno Smith play his worst game since becoming the starter for the Seattle Seahawks, taking over for Russell Wilson. The Chiefs are the Chiefs, as we know. Luckily, Denver was able to get a win against them. They responded against the Dolphins. But you look at the rest of the conference in general, when you look at the third and fourth spot, the Jaguars are at third at 6-2, playing really well with Doug Peterson. Dolphins at 6-3, losing obviously to the Kansas City Chiefs. God, I mean, this is a tough conference, in my opinion. I feel like this has got to be a tougher conference right now than the NFC.
I think for sure, Cody. And when you look across the entirety of the NFL this year, I mean, the Broncos are one of only 10 teams with 3 or fewer victories this season, which is kind of crazy that, more than 2/3 of the league has 4 victories or better. And when you look at the AFC, I mean, that includes Colts, Raiders, Texans, Jets, Chargers, Bills, I mean, Steelers, Browns, Bengals, every team just about in the AFC, except it's almost a shorter list to go the other way, right? I mean, the Broncos and the Titans, Cody, that is, and the Patriots are out in the AFC East. That is the list of teams right now. Broncos, Titans, Patriots of entire AFC with 3 or fewer victories this season, which is crazy. So it does kind of speak to the idea that, man, the NFL was right to expand to 7 playoff teams. There's a lot of teams that can compete for that spot. And I love that as well. I think it keeps more irons in the fire for a lot longer. So there's no clarity right now is essentially what we're saying. I mean, you could say easily the Chiefs or the Ravens are the best team. Some could argue the Jaguars. I mean, you could even still argue the Dolphins to a degree. But in that in between right there, there's teams that are coming up hot, like the Cincinnati Bengals that have won 4 straight games. And you're thinking, okay, after a slow start to the season, now that team's back. And what happens if like the Steelers or Browns get into the postseason with those elite defenses? As bad as their offenses have been at times, you kind of feel like anything can happen. And so I think with the AFC as a whole right now, that's kind of my vibe, is anything can happen in the AFC the rest of the season. We're going to have to see which teams do have that switch flipped in the second half, as Sean Payton has said.
Well, I think as well, you mentioned it as well. You talked about the AFC North. That might be the best division of football right now, with the Ravens sitting at where they're at, and then just 2 games, 1 or 2 games behind them. It's that entire division: the Steelers, Browns, Bengals, 5-3 in the AFC North, which is weird. Obviously, they're going to start facing each other here, and so that's going to kind of balance itself out here. But I think I look at it as well. Denver plays 4 of the teams that are in the top 10 right now in the AFC conference in the second half, including the Chargers. They play them twice. The Chargers right now at 4-4 would be considered 10th. So just in the hunt right there, looking in for maybe one of those wild card spots. And I'm very curious to see how things balance out, because I think there are some of these teams that are in the top 10. They're going to face some tougher opponents in the second half stretch of the schedule. And if Denver can balance things out and find a way to avoid the things that impacted them negatively in the first half of the season and fix those and maybe carry over some improvements, Sayre, Denver's going to have a great chance, in my opinion. Look, I know a lot of people think, hey, it's not very likely, but statistically, it's not impossible. Denver could very well sneak into the back end of the wild card here if they do some things right here at the end of the season. Look, it's going to require them to beat the Chargers. It's going to require them to beat the Raiders essentially as well. But then it's also taking care of business. Like, the biggest game in front of you right now is the Buffalo Bills, who, ironically enough, with how good we know that they can be, they're ranked right now 8th in the AFC in terms of conference standings right now. Like, I mean, that is a little bit wild. And they're 1 game above 500 in this conversation that we're having here. So they were the perennial favorite, I think, outside of them and Kansas City. I think it was those 2 teams once again coming into the season. They were talking about being the favorites for the AFC Championship game. And I just think it's really cool that the AFC right now, looking at where it's at, is still well within reach of pretty much everybody that is still in the mix right now. And obviously, I think in the next 3 weeks, some teams will start to fall out of that. If Denver can win a couple of games, which I mean, with the way that Buffalo is playing, and as we've seen it, like Denver's defense, if they play as good as they have been, Denver's got a chance to beat Buffalo. They have a chance to beat the Minnesota Vikings, who are going to have a new quarterback there, who are obviously missing Kirk Cousins, but they're going to miss Justin Jefferson. But obviously, they have a ton of talented players there that we'll focus on them that week. The Browns, as you mentioned, the great defense that they have, struggling offense. It's a little bit different when teams come to Denver to play versus Denver, I think, going on the road and playing there. So I think that is an advantage that the Broncos do have, and anything at this point is certainly possible. But how do you feel in general about maybe where Denver can kind of rank? Because right now they're ranked second to last right now in the AFC. New England is the only team behind them right now, which Denver will play them on Christmas Eve, unfortunately. So for me, I just want to ask you, how are you feeling in general about maybe what the Broncos can do here in the second half of the season to maybe climb up the rankings a little bit?
When you look at the AFC right now, I think the one thing that stands out to me is the Broncos' margin for error is pretty slim, isn't it? I mean, you've already lost 5 games, which of course puts you in that position to where second half of the season, hey, you may have two losses at best to get you. I mean, we saw the Detroit Lions went on that tear last year and still didn't make the playoffs with 9 victories. So, like we've talked about before, I think 10 wins is kind of that minimum that you're shooting for. That means the Broncos are going to have to go 7-2 in these final 9 games. And I think the 2 games that you can really afford to lose, if I can even say it that way, is those NFC games against Detroit and Minnesota. Now, not saying you want to necessarily go ahead and say, all right, let's pack it in for those 2 games and we can that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're going to lose 2 games only over the second half of the season, you kind of hope it's the Detroit and Minnesota game. And why? Well, because at the end of the year, with as muddy as things are, as unclear as things are in the AFC right now, just imagine at the end of the year when there's 10 to 12 teams fighting for 1 playoff spot or 2 playoff spots there. You need to differentiate yourself by beating those AFC teams that you have left. I'm sure Sean Payton understands that, Cody. I'm sure you guys will get a chance to talk about that this week. Just the importance of every AFC game from here on out with the way that things are muddied in that conference. I definitely think the Broncos' margin for error, of course, we know with 5 losses, it's slim anyway, but especially against AFC opponents, you have to bring whatever you got to win all those AFC games here on out.
That's the most important thing. And I think for Sean Payton as well, the message that he said to these guys in the locker room is, hey, look, we didn't start the way we wanted to, but we have a chance to finish very strong here. And I think that's the overall vibe and the message that I think I've gained from my takeaway of just talking to Sean Payton this week, talking to players as they return back to practice. And this is a big, big game in prime time. I mean, the stakes are a little bit higher because everyone's going to see you. And I think we're all hoping that, maybe prime time can be good to the Denver Broncos for once, because unfortunately it has not been in quite some time. So maybe the tide changes a little bit. We obviously talked about in yesterday's episode of Lockdown Broncos, Sean Payton's history coming out of the bye week. What will we see from this Broncos team and Broncos country? As you're watching along, do you think that they can make some noise inside the AFC here, sitting at 3-5 with a slate of games where, hey, they can go on a run here in the second half of the season? Make sure you let us know in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube, or you can always let us know on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Lockdown Broncos if you're listening wherever you get your podcast. But Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos, Sayre Bedinger is going to sit down with Joe Marino, host of the Lockdown Bills podcast, as they cross it over for a crossover Thursday preview of a Monday Night Football showdown in Buffalo. We'll see you then.